Welcome back. I'm going to talk about Jehovah's standards. You'll often find Jehovah's Witnesses say that the world has no standards and that Jehovah's law is perfect and unparalleled. Now, I'm going to give you just a little bit of heads up here. This is not going to be for the faint of heart. So if you're a bit squeamish or you're easily triggered, then maybe this video is not going to be for you. Now, before we get into this in a bit more detail, let's just remind ourselves what it is that Jehovah's Witnesses say about the Mosaic Law. Witnesses insist that the Mosaic Law safeguarded personal rights, protected women, children, and families, and promoted mercy and fair treatment. So gushing is their view of the law, they conclude it promoted love above all else. There is no question that the law was righteous, they insist. Okay, so that's what they say about the law. I want you to imagine something for me. You're living in ancient Israel, and you're in a small village, and you hear a scuffle outside. So you rush outside your tent, and you see two men fighting. They've had an argument. Maybe they'd been drinking. Now they're fighting. And a woman comes out of one of the tents, and one of the men fighting is her husband. So she's a brave woman. She rushes towards the scene, and either in attempt to help her husband or to stop the fight, she reaches out and touches the other man's crotch or his genitals. Now, would you consider that a crime? And if you do consider it a crime, what do you think the punishment would be? Well, this isn't just make-believe. This is a scenario described explicitly in Jehovah's laws. Okay? And Jehovah proceeds to give us his standards for what must be done given this crime has been committed. In Deuteronomy 25:11 and 12, it describes that if this situation is to occur, then the woman's hand must be chopped off. And the verse explicitly says, you must feel no sorrow for her. You must chop her hand off. I find it very interesting that the latest translation of the New World Translation says her hand should be amputated, which I find absolutely comical, as if the ancient Jewish elders in this tiny little Jewish hamlet is going to give her some anesthetic and then bring her to a clinic while a surgeon takes her hand off in a safe way. If this law were to be fulfilled as described, it would be taken off with a knife, an axe, or if they're lucky, with a sword. What I want you to imagine for the next few moments is not what it will be like to endure that yourself. I think it's probably hard or impossible to imagine that. Imagine what it will be like just to observe this law being acted out. So there's the fight. The woman touches the other man in the crotch. One of the village elders notices this, and he calls a judicial committee. The woman's found guilty of touching another man's crotch. They consult Jehovah's perfect law, and they conclude that her hand has to be chopped off. The woman begs for forgiveness. She tries to explain what was happening. She asks for mercy, and the village elders tell her that Jehovah has said explicitly not to show sorrow toward her, not to feel pity, but to carry out the law. Her husband also pleads with the elders. Her children don't really know what's happening, but they know something serious is occurring. Two men are ordered to grab the woman. They drag her kicking and screaming to a tree stump. She starts to cry. She becomes fervent in her pleas. One of the men grabs hold of her by the shoulder. The other man grabs hold of her by the hand. and they force her arm onto the tree stump. They call another man over with an axe. The woman is now sweating profusely. Her husband is on his knees, begging for mercy. He will do anything. The children now recognize that something terrible is about to happen. A crowd starts to form around this woman and the whole scene as it unfolds. The man is given the go-ahead to swing his axe. He swings his axe and then bang. He doesn't take off the arm. The arm's half severed. She screams in absolute agony. Her children and her husband are now in just a heap, crying, bitter. There's ribbons of flesh. Blood is pumping out from her arm. The woman is now sweating all over her body and she's shaking. The man who just swung the axe vomits and passes out. Another man is called forward to pick the axe up. He's told to swing the axe. Bang. The arm's taken off. Blood is gushing from her arm. She passes out from the pain. One of the elders picks up the arm to show to everyone and says, "Let that be a warning to the rest of you. This is what happens when you break Jehovah's law. We did this not out of spite or malice. We did this to uphold Jehovah's standards."
That's gruesome. That's despicable.
Yes, I agree. But it's also
Jehovah's standard.
We as a culture, as a planet, most of us at least, have moved on from those ancient times. In fact, I think it's very unlikely that these laws were actually carried out like this. But that's probably a discussion for another time. But the fact that we can read these laws and then try to describe them as loving or just or protecting people or safeguarding rights. The Jewish people had no concept whatsoever of human rights. The idea didn't even exist yet. We have moved on from that. You and I are far more moral than Jehovah ever has been. And never let us forget that the governing body uses this same language, this same technique to convince us that their diktats, their orders, their controlling behavior is good and just and loving. When they tell people to give up their lives rather than accept a blood transfusion, when they prescribe the psychological bullying of tens of thousands of people every single year through shunning and disfellowshipping, when they indoctrinate people with the idea that the world is depraved and corrupt and immoral, they are using the same reasoning when they try to defend these laws in the Hebrew Bible. They are just as indefensible. What we can do is use our own power of reason, use our own thinking, use our own moral sensibilities to determine if an action is fair or just or loving. We have that capacity in ourselves. Let's use it and not hand that over to a group of people who claim to be upholding what can only be described as depraved and immoral and unjust laws. So thanks for watching. That's all for today. I'll see you next time.